Good evening, everyone. Coming to you live from Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm Scott Harrison, Artistic Director of Ironweed Productions, and I want to welcome you to Talking Theater Live. Talking Theater Live is a series of conversations between me and Santa Fe theater artists, sharing stories about their experiences in the theater and the unique paths that led them to creating theater here in Santa Fe. I'm very honored to have as my guest this evening Santa Fe actor, director, writer, teacher, Teatro Paraguas board member, Alix Hudson. Alix, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Here's a little bit of a little bit of background about Alix. I see people coming on and joining us here. Alix is a playwright, teacher, writer, actor, director, and general theater maker whose home away from home is Teatro Paraguas. She was last seen on stage as a compiler and actor in A Travessa, Poetry of the Border, and as Unfriendly Animal 1 in her Christmas play, The Holy Season. She plays Emmy in the upcoming production of Doll's House 2, which is produced by the New Mexico Actors Lab and is coming up very soon. She was also director of We Are Hispanic American Women, okay, earlier this year. Her soundscapes have been most recently featured in her full-length play Revolution, Atacama, and currently running at Teatro Paraguas for one more weekend, El Coquí Espectacular and the Bottle of Doom, which is an excellent production. I saw it last weekend, so I highly recommend that you go see it. Again, one more weekend, 4 more performances. She's excited for the premiere of her newest play, Hummingbird, at Teatro Paraguas, which will be appearing in February of 2020. When not in the theater, Alix teaches dual language kindergarten, Spanish and English, at Kearney Elementary. So Alix, again, thanks so much for joining me. And I always like to start with the question of what is your earliest memory of, as a child, of being captured by the imagination or the world of make-believe?
I've always been a big make-believer. I've always loved worlds that I can create, and mostly worlds that I create. I occasionally participate in other people's worlds, but I loved creating them, like especially with little animals. I had like hundreds of little model animals that I would love to move around and create. I loved always watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and his land of make-believe. And I participated in, when I was like 4 or 5 years old, A Midsummer Night's Dream. That was my first theater experience. After that, I didn't do theater for many years, but...
Now, what part did you...
I was Cobweb.
Excellent.
I was the little pixie, and I came up, and it was this like 70s tie-dye version of it, so it was like about this big, and I was like in this tie-dye shirt with all these beads, and I like came up with a headband.
That's great.
And I had my line about like, end your bow, but I got so overwhelmed that, Bottom was like, your line is end your bow. I said, that's your line, or that's my line. You can't say your name. I got so confused and threw the whole thing off. But that was my first experience with theater, which was very much a make-believe. So I was trying to figure out, like, what exactly is going on here. Mostly I just ran around in tie-dye, and it was great. I loved it. But
so was that first experience, intoxicating or terrifying, or kind of a mixture of...
It was fun. It was not scary, which is great because I have a lot of stage fright. I think even still, it's a scary, and it's just such a huge responsibility, right, to do something on the stage. I think that's what gets me. But when I was little, it was just fun. I was running. It was an outside performance, so we're just running around at dusk. And,
cool.
And it was really, it was a lot of fun. It was, but it was confusing. It was like, why are we, what are we doing exactly? Like, I mean, I liked what we were doing, but the idea of like, we're playing people that we aren't, it was... Oh,
interesting.
Yeah. I was like, okay. I mean, I do this at home, but I never knew adults did this as well. Right? Yeah.
Wow. And do you remember your first live performance that you saw?
I don't... I know I saw the Nutcracker when I was really little, and it was like amazing. I loved it, and I was so mad. I'm still mad that the Rat King dies. I love the Rat King. It's my favorite character. Still my favorite character. But so it probably wasn't that, but that's the first one my parents always tell me we saw this collection of native oral storytelling. It was at the Idle Jorg, sorry if this is wrong, but it's in Indianapolis, and it was up in this small black box theater, and it was several Native actors doing some of like the Raven myths and things. And apparently, I don't remember this, but apparently I was like riveted. I was like 3 or 4, and just like was like, nope, we're gonna stay here. We're gonna watch this thing. And
wow,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah. So those, I guess, would be my first two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, did you, because you're a writer, you're a playwright and a poet, you write short stories as well?
Yeah.
And so what came first for you? Was it an interest in writing, or an interest in kind of, partaking in, acting, partaking in?
It's like once I was an established kid, right? Like I was in a high schooler. I would say like it sort of came simultaneously. When I was younger, I always wrote, and I always liked doing make believe. But I didn't grow up in I would go and see plays occasionally, but I didn't grow up in like a theatrical family, so it wasn't quite. There were shows at the Vanity. We had a community theater in Crawfordsville that was a lot of fun. So I would do plays starting in middle school there, and I enjoyed doing that. So I guess it was kind of simultaneous, but I didn't connect them quite. I didn't write theater until high school, when I did it for assignments. And then one time my Spanish teacher was like, "You'd probably be good at this. Could you write a nativity play for my church?" And I was like, yes. It was a reworking of the Gifts of the Magi, that O. Henry story. And so
interesting.
And so I should have put it together then, but it was the most like enlivening thing I'd ever done. I loved it.
Man.
So I did that. I'm like there sitting in all my classes, just like writing out.
Yeah.
Like I put in a chorus. I don't know. Like it probably wasn't very good, but it was a lot of fun.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Now, and what, like when you started writing, what was it about it that was most exciting, or what drew you to it the most?
I think it was fun. Like it was fun getting to put words in people's mouths, but the most fun thing was once, and this was more in college, like when I got to that level, I studied abroad and did a playwriting program in Dublin, actually, for a semester with Tisch, NYU Tisch. And the idea was then I was writing my first full-length play, and it was like I didn't want the play to turn out the way it did, but like there was nothing I could do about it. Like the characters, I had made the characters, and then they were living their lives, and
oh wow,
there was nothing I could, I had put the words in their mouths at the beginning, but now they were talking on their, you just have to listen to that. When you get tuned into a script, you just listen to them, and you just write what they're saying. And I just love that idea of that sort of like
cool, yeah.
weird medium work that you do. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you feel, do the voices, I mean, one thing I've always been hugely fascinated with, I mean, as a theater person, and also just I love in terms of just reading novel, I'm always fascinated with dialogue. And I mean, when I read realistic dialogue that just feels real and just root, it just I'm just completely taken away.
Right. Absolutely.
The process, talk about the process for you of creating dialogue in specific characters' voices.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. In college, we were always assigned to do observed scenes where you went and eavesdropped on conversations and wrote down everything they said, and it's a great activity. I mean, I assume most people do it, but it's really good practice. After that, the process of creating dialogue for different characters, I think it's a lot of the creation of the character itself, rather than trying to slant the dialogue to sound like a certain character. If you create a character and they're a believable, and at least to you, right? That's what playwrights, right? We do. We try to check them out and view them as believable. If they're believable, and we write a strong enough character with enough backstory, and we really spend enough time trying to listen to them rather than trying to just dictate to them what they're supposed to do. Usually they start, it sounds like a kind of weak answer, but they sort of start talking, and then you can sort of listen to it, and then I think a lot of that comes through with the editing, where you go through and say, okay, was this the character talking, or was this me just dictating to the character? And then it becomes it only becomes a little inauthentic when I've written play like Revolution that was originally written in Spanish. Or no, it was taking place in Spanish, but I wrote it in English, right? And so, but I wanted to still give the idea of Spanish in it, and then I also wanted people, if they came and they didn't speak very much English, could still have an idea of what was going on. So then that becomes a different project that isn't how someone would talk. Like, unlike Tanya Saracho, who wrote Enfrascada, Fade. She's a really, and she writes Spanglish dialogue like nobody's business. And that's actually how people talk. But again, it's another question when you're writing a piece that you originally had, would be in another language, but you're trying to make it seem as though it's in another.
Right.
Yeah. And so, yeah.
And now, when did you first get, when were you first drawn to, Latino, Chicano, Hispanic writers?
I started learning Spanish in high school, and I just kind of glommed onto the language. I just find it was neat. I think people have affinities for languages like you have affinities for everything else. I was just like, I'm gifted at languages, and then tried to take Arabic in college and was like, maybe it's just Spanish.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe not Arabic.
Yeah, like Arabic's amazing, but it just like it boggled my mind. I could barely say anything after 3 years of taking it. But in Spanish, I took it. I studied abroad for a summer in Spain, and then I minored in college, which was nice. I wasn't going to minor, and then I had a professor who's like, no, come on, do this. I'll do an independent study with you. What do you want to do? And I was like,
oh, great.
I'd like to work with female Spanish-speaking playwrights and do that as an independent study. And she was like, great, let's do it. So that was a really fun. So I got to study a lot of the voices working today, mostly in Spanish language. I worked with a few sort of borderlands voices that worked in Spanglish, but mostly Spanish language in Spain or in Central and South America. And then for my sort of final project, I translated Paloma Obrero's, she wrote these Nights of Ephemeral Love, like they were these little shorts, and so it was really fun to get to delve into translation for the first time, this word versus this word, So I guess that's where it started. And then when I came out here, when I was talking with Robert Benjamin, because his daughter and I lived in Zuni, New Mexico together. Go figure. His daughter was a doctor out there, and so I was in their doctor's book club, even though I was a teacher. And so when I moved out here, she was like, "You should get in touch with my dad. He does theater," and he was like, "Go to Teatro Paraguas. You're gonna after we were talking, he was like, they're gonna like you there, and you're gonna find a good spot there." So I did, and I haven't left.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And when did you come to New Mexico?
In 2011.
2011. Okay.
Yeah.
And what? Because it never fails to yield a good story. What drew you out here?
Right. So I was a senior in college, and I signed up for Teach for America, which, if you're in the education, please don't judge me. I know better now, but I signed up for Teach for America, and I was going to go to South Louisiana, actually, which I was very excited about. I think it's great food, great culture. But I was dating a woman at the time who was from Poake and had a job at the Los Alamos National Lab. So I said, hey, could I maybe get a transfer here? It was going well, so maybe I'll move out here.
Wow.
This wasn't completely apropos of nothing. When I was younger, my family, we spent a couple summers out here in New Mexico, and I had it's a really special place, as we all know. So and so I was like, I did ask her, it does get cold, right? I wasn't quite, I was like, I had only been out during the summer, and I was like, I'm pretty sure I've heard about this happening, but.
And a lot of people, because my wife and I, Lisa, moved here from the East Coast, and even friends and things back east, and I probably had this picture too, but I picture, you got, it's like the Wile E. Coyote Desert, with the cactuses and
exactly.
Anyway,
when I go back to Indiana, it's always like, oh, well, this must be so cold for you. I'm like, well, it is cold because it stays cold and it's wet cold, but it's this cold, literally right now in Santa Fe. It's actually 22 degrees.
Snow. Yeah. I know people are always, it's funny.
It is. Yeah.
So you, when you moved out here, had you? Because I know you direct as well. When did that interest come about?
That came during college as well. I majored in drama, and so I took a really great directing class. It was sort of like maybe outside of the realm of what we strictly think of as directing, but it was really nice. He had an emphasis on like building your set and like, you know, like not the actual technical building, but like you need to have really good set design. You need to like, it taught us how to like close read texts, how to like, you know, pull things out. Excellent. And so, that class with Clifford was really, really good. And then I directed a couple plays in college. I first directed the first play I wrote, Favor Fire, which I will never direct a piece I wrote again because you don't see as much, right? Other people just see way more than you do, and then you get possessive and defensive. It's
interesting. Yeah.
It's a bad idea. Well, unless it works for you, then good for you. But like, I mean, for me, it was just it was bad. It was a very wonderful production and performance, and like it was a success. But I realized looking back that I wouldn't want to do that. I also directed a version of Undine, you know, the Hirodu play that's based on the like German myth about the water sprite who goes and lives in the court with all the knights, and she's just like. Like she was a kind of girl, kind of water sprite, like raised by people, and she just realized that this was not what she was to be. Like this was not her life, and so I did sort of an eco-feminist retelling of Undine and directed it, and part of it was with puppets. You know, I was a senior.
Oh,
you know,
man.
It was fun. It was
That's
fun.
great. Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. But yeah, so I had done that before, and then I've directed out here some as well. Yeah.
Is there do you find there are particular types of stories that you're drawn to directing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to have. I mean, the script has to be good, and if it's not like the most like incredible script, it has to at least be. It has to be authentic to experience. You know, like it has to have good dialogue, or you know, really be telling a story that other people haven't told. So it has, you know, so it's either a story that is historically untold, or just like a script that's just really hard to put down, either because the dialogue's incredible and or the imagery is just so exquisite. Like we think of like with Eliot and The Soldier's Fugue by Getta. It's just indelible. Like that dialogue is just, even if some of it isn't but a lot of it is very realistic dialogue, and I love that mix. I guess I'm really drawn to the mix of like the lyrical and then just like this is how people actually talk, and it's still, there's beauty to be found in that.
I love that too. Yeah, I mean it's interesting for me because I don't really have, you know, like poetry isn't something that I have a lot of experience with. However, I feel I'm drawn to. I've learned the more plays that I've had the opportunity to work on and learn from and everything, that I'm really drawn to and surprised by the different types of poetry that you can find. Like, I mean, really percussive poetry, really you know, a lot of times people think poetry, it's really, you know, it's lyrical, but it's like, I love, you know, the rhythmic or, I mean, it's just, and to hear, like, I know from, you know, the first plays that we did were Shepherd, which you know, for me, I'm really drawn to a lot of the, you know, the poetry of his language. And, but I agree. I'm in that same place. I love incredibly realistic dialogue, but then also that dialogue that can bring in.
Yeah, I think it's made it even more powerful, right? Like when it's like, it's just they're talking and it sounds realistic, and then you're like, whoa, all right, like you know, a playwright slips something in, and it's still within that vernacular of the everyday, and it's just, but it reaches that next level of either allegory or image or whatever it is. Totally.
That's cool.
Totally agree.
Well, let's. I know you mentioned Eliot, A Soldier's Fugue, which you're directing, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I know I am personally, and Ironweed is very excited to have the opportunity to collaborate on a project that I want to talk more about. Now that was your inspiration, which is the Eliot trilogy by Chiara Allegria Ures, and that is a collaboration that's happening this fall between Teatro Paraguas, the Santa Fe Playhouse, and Ironweed Productions. Fantastic idea that I want you to talk about in terms of it's a trilogy of plays. Eliot, A Soldier's Fugue, Water by the Spoonful, and The Happiest Song Plays Last. And the idea is that each play will play in a different theater. The first one will open up one week, the second one will open up the next week, and the third will open up the third. And there'll be a weekend when they're all happening at the same time, which is such a great idea. And I just wanted you to talk about, first of all, when did you first get drawn to Chiara's writing, and what was the inspiration for this idea?
Sure. Yeah. So I think my draw to Chiara Uves is like synonymous with my like almost my draw to Paraguas. Like I had been, it was when I was in Word Overall, the poetry of Neruda and Whitman. Well, when I was there, and it was in between a rehearsal, and I had to run a board that night, and so like a light board, soundboard, and so I was just sort of bumming around. That's when I was living up in Poake, and Roxanne Tapia and Jonathan Harrell were like, "Oh, come out! Like, let's go to Dr. Feelgood's and hang out." And so we did, and we started talking about theater, and they're like, "Well, you know Chiara," and I was like, "I do not." And they're like, "You need to read her. She's incredible." And start with Yamaya's Belly, which is this beautiful story of a little boy who grows up in Cuba, and it's him moving to it's like basically getting on a raft to go to the United States.
Wow.
And actually that was the first play I wound up directing at Paraguas, and it was a really, really beautiful performance. Both of them were in it, actually. And so we've had this like love, we wrote to her and just like invited, we're like, we know you're busy, but like come out. And she just wrote us this beautiful letter back, just thanking us and saying, you remind me of my abuela, how she always used to greet everyone at the door and give them caldo santo. You guys have welcomed me. And in that
that's
same
so
way,
nice when writers do that.
Exactly.
I mean,
she's just
so
kind
generous.
and
Right.
generous and just, yeah. And so it was a couple years later. So then this was like 2 years ago, right after Theater Santa Fe got started, actually.
Okay.
I think it was right around that, sort of its inception. We were out, I think at Duel, probably. Rest in peace,
No, I know.
Duel.
Yeah. Unfortunately, no longer.
And so we were there and having a beer, and we were talking about, since Theater Santa Fe had just, so we were so excited about this new collaboration between all the theaters in Santa Fe. And we were just sort of talking, like, wouldn't it be neat if we could collaborate with other theaters in even a greater way than like sharing publicity and having a website? Like, what if we put on a trilogy? And so there were two trilogies that came to mind: the Carlos Murillo Javier Plays trilogy, and then of course Chiara Uves' Eliot Plays. And we had done a reading of Eliot, and we had done Water by the Spoonful the year, 2 years before, 3 years before.
Great production,
Thank you. And so, so we had this history with two of the three plays, and we were like, well, that's kind of where that started, that idea.
Yeah.
So it's been a couple of years in the making, so it's really, really exciting.
That's really cool.
Actually be doing it.
Yeah. And when you first kind of envisioned it, did you envision it kind of the way it is? Like,
Exactly.
Let's have it open up.
Exactly. Because that middle weekend, if you can have the people
Right.
who want to stretch it out between, like, what would it be? Like 8 weeks if you want to see it the first weekend, middle weekend, last weekend, if you want to see, or if you just are that sort of person, come the middle weekend, or like that fourth, whatever, however many weeks, right? Come that middle weekend and
See them all.
See them all. Like Eliot's final weekend, the middle weekend of Water by the Spoonful, and the first weekend of Happiest Song, and do them back to back.
Right.
Like do Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Thursday,
see
Friday,
them all in a
Saturday,
row,
and just to really grasp that, to see Eliot as he moves through his life and his experiences as this young man who's experienced war. And I think it'll be really, amazing in terms of publicity, but also very powerful to see these three Eliots and see, to see how differently and how similarly he's portrayed, to see.
Right.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
and it hits on so many different elements that are so resonant right now. The family connection, addiction, the aftermath of war, veterans, what they're dealing with.
Exactly. And the generational trauma,
right. And I feel like it's just also got that, I don't know, for me, stories that I just really resonate with, stories that have a sense of how healing can happen in the smallest, most subtlest, but ultimately strongest way. And in the midst of just these incredibly gritty circumstances.
Right.
I mean, that
Exactly.
to me, it just
Exactly.
really, that's what really speaks to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally
Yeah.
agree.
And having a and having a community of theaters and a community of actors and then a community of people seeing it, it's just
Yeah.
really a great,
yeah,
great
sharing that
idea.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
Are
it's
you
really
drawn to, like, I know for me, and one of my favorite playwrights is Horton Foote, and he wrote this cycle of plays, which we did when I first moved to Santa Fe. We did just a living room reading over like a year and a half of this. It's 9 plays
Oh, wow.
called the Orphan's Home Cycle that he based on his dad, when his dad was from when he was a young boy and was basically orphaned to when he finally had his own family. So
Oh,
it takes
wow.
place like over 26 years and
Yeah.
9 plays, and they ultimately about 4 years ago, and Michael Wilson at Hartford Stage, they condensed the 9 plays down into three plays that
Yeah.
were 3 acts.
Yeah, yeah,
But that whole feeling for me of when we read through all the plays, over a long period of time, it was really, there was something about bringing people, a community of people together around a whole story that,
Yeah.
and a multi-generational story
Yeah.
that for me really resonated. I mean, is that something for you that's kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, just from your initial interest, I mean, is
Yeah.
that those kind of epic stories with kind of community connections? Is that,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's invigorating to think
Yeah.
about, the Santa Fe theater community being like, oh, but have you seen this one? And just really
Right.
talking about it, dissecting, talking about these themes that are, so essential and so important,
Right.
so relevant, and they're universal and also very immediate. And to have that brought not just with one stage, us doing our version of it, and you're doing, but to say like, we are doing these 3 plays by this same playwright, and we're planning from the beginning to really create this sort of cohesive vision
Right.
of, to present to people. Yeah, I think that's immensely powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that must have
very
been cool.
cool.
Did you see the
I didn't, and it's like a dream of mine at some point to
'em on.
put them, because and I think there's something like with this project as well, and people that could see the whole thing, whether it's over a period of time or over one weekend. I mean, there's something too about experiencing that size of a story that you
Yeah.
just can't,
Right,
you
that
can't replicate.
Right, it's just this expansive, right? Because it's you follow Elliot, but there's Yasmin, there's Odessa, there's all these characters. There's other characters that keep sort of popping up, and other characters that you only find in one. That I think and all of their stories just go so deep, and
Right.
so it's definitely not a singular narrative that you're following.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Do you just along this line? I've been thinking myself. I wanted to just talk a little bit about, kind of your journey as a theater person, as a storyteller. And I know for me, it's interesting because when I first got interested in acting, I mean, it was when I was in college, and for me, it was the draw to acting was that I was incredibly introverted, and the opportunity to express ththings on stage and be larger than kind of larger than myself was something that there was this huge draw for me in that an aspect of it. But it's interesting because the longer I've been involved in theater, the more I've found that what I love most about it is story. You know what I mean? Like, because I came to directing late, I just started that, probably like 15 years ago. And I know when I got interested in that, I found, that I was much more, when I would go back to acting, I'd look at characters and I'd say, well, how does this character fit? I mean, how are they part of the story?
Right. Yeah.
And then as with starting Ironweed and artistic director, it becomes even, okay, well, what's the story of, our company or whatever. So
Yeah.
for me, it's
Yeah.
been like this thing of kind of growing towards that story. It started from a personal place, and now it's more like the story is the most important thing. And I just wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what drew you initially to theater, and what now do you find most resonates with you about it?
Yeah. I feel like I've definitely had like shy aspects of me, but I've also always been kind of an overblown person. So like at first it was interesting when I became involved with theater, I was told to pull back, like, and people say that's not how a person actually is. And that was an interesting thing to reckon with, because it's like, that is actually how I am. Like, and so it was it was an interesting thing, because I didn't feel like I was being melodramatic or overblown, but it was just like, my advisor in college, he was excellent, Andrew Manley, he teaches at Colorado College. He'd be like, you just have a floppy body, Alex. Why is your body so floppy? Because I just like, and he's like, your frog face. And I was just be moving my face around, you know. So it was really interesting to see, to learn that natural means different things to many different people, right? Because it's like, people write that, you know, you're the method acting, right? You do what would you feel like if you felt like this? Do it. And it's like, you do it, and they're like, that's a little much. And so that's a really interesting thing to, maybe then that was a reckoning that should have taken place then. But also, what are the many ways that something can actually be authentic and be real, you know, like, and so I found that really interesting. At first it put me off of acting. I was like, I'm just not good at this. I just shouldn't act. And then when it was into my senior year of college, I started acting a little bit more. And then when I came out to Paraguas, they're like, oh, but like, just audition, just do this thing. And then I got back into acting, and I'm glad I did. I enjoy it very much. So I guess my sort of initial pull was, I just sort of fell headlong into theater when I went to college, and then sort of that trimming back, and then spreading back out. And now when I look at theater, I always, you know, like, it's a probably a cliche thing, but I always think of Lorca's quote, like, you know, that like theater is poetry that stands up from the page and makes itself human. And when it does it talks, and it talks. And what is it? It talks in something, it cries and despairs, right? El teatro es la poesía que se levanta de la página para hacerse llora y grite. No habla y grita, llore y desespera, right? Like, it talks and it shouts, it cries and despairs, right? Like, and I just love that idea. Yeah, that idea of manifestation, I guess, right? That idea, right?
Nice.
You're like, you're a playwright, and you're writing it, and you're like, that didn't. When they said that didn't work at all. Like, why didn't it worked when they were talking in my head? Why didn't that work when someone said it, or vice versa? Like, I thought this was like, this was something I really needed to work on, and it played so beautifully. Really, to say I love that you have to take your ego out of yourself. Like, when you do theater, because it's like, a playwright, great, you write the script, you hand it off, and then you have to be done with it. Like, you know, you'll edit it if they want that, but it's equally the actors, it's equally the director, it's equally the audience, which is incredibly humbling.
Yes,
right.
Right.
And so I guess that's what I love, the collaborative aspect, I guess, cool. Now. Yeah. It's really is interesting to me. I love writing commission. Like, I mentioned the Unfriendly Animal 1 in my holy season, because I love writing the Christmas show for Paraguas every year. And it's a kid's show. Like, it was 29 characters, I think, this last year, you know, like, from like a 2.5-year-old to a 70-odd someone, you know, and you say, okay, who wants to be in it? How much writing do they want to do? And or talking do they want to do? And then you write it accordingly. And it's really fun to write something that has to fill that community aspect, and has to be easy for people to learn and memorize and do. But then you still try to, like, get a vision through of, like, what is our theme? What are we trying to express? Because, right, again, take your ego out, and how do we tell this story all together? I guess. Yeah. I really like that.
That's very cool. Do you feel, you know, it's interesting now, obviously we're in this very kind of volatile time, depending on what side of the fence you're on in our country. And it, to me, you know, it can be a slippery slope in terms of, I feel like there's certain, you know, whether it's theater, whether it's writing, whether it's television, things that where you're, you know, you can be kind of preaching to the choir, you know, and it's like, how do you kind of get back to the kind of these human messages that ultimately we really all, there's so many things I feel like that we can all resonate with and agree on. And it's like, how do you get those stories that kind of bring those elements out so that there can be some sort of, you know, maybe common connection? What do you feel like as a writer and as a theater person, how do you feel like we can best tell our stories in a way that'll connect the most
Yeah.
bring the most connection?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I feel like that's a very timely question, and I feel like I am unwilling to sort of sacrifice what I feel are sort of immutable values that have been transcended or been taken away by people, right? Like I'm not willing to say like, oh, but everyone has a fair point of view. Like some point of views are genocidal, and I won't shy away from that.
Right.
But what you can do is you take the people that you take the people in your place, right? You don't write stereotypes, right? You write real people. Like you don't write evil characters. You don't write saint characters. You write people who are real, who are dealing with a difficult situation. And you write, it's that poetry that stands up from the page and these people that stand up. So maybe it's someone who says, maybe they don't think about what maybe their voting record is, but they come to a play and they see, like in Hummingbird, right, these kids who've been separated from their parents, and they learn to love these kids trying to figure out their lives, and without being didactic, just sort of saying like, look at these people struggling in a situation, like we are people struggling in a situation. How do we grapple with these realities that we need to always be aware of, of the other person, of the other community, which is, again, going back to the Eliot trilogy, something that's tackled in every play, but I'd say especially in Water by the Spoonful and Happiest Song. Like, right, I mean, we talk about and generations in war, but it's very family centric in Eliot. But in the other two plays, you sort of see a wider vision of how people experience addiction or how people experience the war in the Middle East. I would say,
That's,
so I guess,
that's great. Well, I have one final question. This one I always like to ask everybody because, again, it never fails to yield a good answer. Because you have so many different fascinating roles as a theater person, as a writer, director, teacher, actor, and I wondered if there could be one moment you could describe, whether it's you're on stage, whether you're writing, whether you're teaching somebody, where during that moment you feel like this is why I have to do this and why I love this so much.
Yeah.
Or if it's 2 or 3, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I think first of when I was directing We Are Hispanic American Women, okay, by Patricia Crespin. It's a fun. It's not trying to be the Pulitzer-winning play, but it shows Northern New Mexican life, and it shows women, and it's fun, and it's funny, and it's the multiple generations. And I was so hesitant to step into directing it because I had a really busy fall, I had a really busy spring, and I was like, we couldn't find a director. I was like, okay, I'll do it. But I'm so glad I did. And there was this one. It was a dress rehearsal, I think, or maybe it was. It wasn't our preview, I know that, but it was a dress rehearsal, and we're there, and Paula's daughter Amelia's running around like with this turban on her head, and then Josephine, who's just Jojo's granddaughter and Jenny's daughter, is on stage like stealing masa out of the bowl and like eating it as she's making tortillas and like doing the scene, and I was just like, this is what community theater looks like. This is it, like, and it's this play about like Latina, like Nueva Mexicana women in like the outskirts of Albuquerque, and it was like, this is it. We're like the theater becoming itself, manifesting itself. And so I love, that was just, I'm just sitting back there like taking line notes and just enjoying it immensely. That was that great sort of confluence of like community and theater and the storytelling, telling the truth and the truth telling the story kind of thing. Definitely that. And there are always those little moments when you're teaching too throughout the day. Like you have this moment where you're like, I will teach forever, and then you have another moment where you're like, I am quitting today. Like it's just the nature of it. You're just like, well, that flopped, or like, like here's a kid decoding a word for the first time, or here's a kid like making like a really amazing connection to text to self, or creating something for the first time. And you get to do that in theater. You get to create things for the first time. And I guess in that way it is a very childlike aspect, even though it's a big person professional thing that we're doing now too.
Nice.
So,
Wow. Well, Alix, this has been fascinating and thought-provoking. Thank you so much.
It's been a lot of fun.
Really have enjoyed this. And thank you all for joining us. This will be if in case you didn't see all of it live, or you want to watch it again, or this will be posted on our Ironweed Facebook page, which is at Ironweed Santa Fe. Also, Theater Santa Fe very generously posts this on their Theater Santa Fe website in their community tab, and we've got a little Talking Theater Live link there as well, so it will be on there as well. And we'll also post on my Facebook page and Ironweed's any future interviews that are coming up. Thank you all again very much for joining us. Thank you again very much,
you.
Alix,
Yeah.
and hope you all have a good evening. Good night.
Good night.